Greetings, everybody. I want to welcome you to Compass Games Live, episode 39. My name is John Kranz. It's a pleasure to have you today. And today is Thursday, August 27th. And we have a very special show for you tonight where we'd like to go in depth on certain game projects that we have in development. And tonight is no exception. So as you can see just over my shoulder here, we're going to be talking about the Fall of Tobruk. So Chris Fawcett will be joining us momentarily. Before we do that, though, just a few quick announcements. First of all, over here, Jacobite Rising, that's going to be our next release, and that's going to start shipping tomorrow. So that's based on the Commands and Colors Tricorn system, American Revolution. It is a standalone game. You do not need to own any other games in the series, so this is a standalone game, and it actually starts shipping out tomorrow. So just want to make you aware of that. Also, our most recent release right here is Assault Artillery from Red Poppy's campaign. So saw some great comments just about it recently today. People really enjoying the series, and that's our third volume in the series, so we're really happy to be able to support it well. And again, that was released earlier this month. And as I like to do, as you all know, in each episode we do, I like to talk a little bit about what's happening as far as the website, what you can do to become involved. So over in the far left column in that nice big yellow bright box is our newsletter. If you just click on that and give us your email, we'll add you to our email list, and you'll get a newsletter from us basically once a week. We won't overrun your email inbox, we promise not to do that to you. Then if you look far right bottom corner, you'll see me again in there saying talk to us, and that's a great way you can reach out to us with any comments or feedback, etc. We actually use your feedback through that service for our town hall meetings that we do every other week with Bill Thomas. So we'll be using your questions and your feedback, and we'll be airing those next week on Thursday, as you probably already know. And as far as the newsletter goes, if you do subscribe to that, I'll just share with you here what the newsletter looks like. So we just recently shipped out our last email about 2 days ago. It announced Cradles of Civilization is now live on Kickstarter. Just as you know, the way Compass works with Kickstarters is it's another avenue, another marketing vehicle to help get the word out to reach an audience that we might not otherwise be able to reach through our website, Console World Forum, Board Game Geek, etc. So Kickstarter is a great way to sort of help spread the word for certain games. So no exception here for Cradle of Civilization, which is actually 2 games in 1 box. So you can read here more about it. Absolutely. It's also available. It's been available for pre-order on our website. So if you've already pre-ordered the game, there's no need to place your pledge. The only exception that I noted is we do have an option on the Kickstarter that if you purchase 2 games instead of 1, 2 copies instead of 1, you get a small discount. So that is a small difference. I noticed that you can actually get a small discount if you ended up ordering a second copy for a friend, etc., or a backup copy for yourself, so you always have a mint edition game in your game collection. So just want to mention that. And as again, tomorrow is the 28th. So tomorrow we begin shipping of Tricorn Jacobite Rising. Again, 13 battles, also some scenarios, smaller skirmish actions. We are now shipping, as you can see here, there's a Red Poppies announcement. Next month, we'll be shipping Dawn's Early Light, the War of 1812. So you can get a little information about that. Also available on our website, of course. Here's where we are right now. So we always like to talk about what our next live broadcast will be that we're going to be airing. So we're here right now doing this live, and again with Chris Fawcett. And also, we always like to show you our last aired or recorded broadcast, which was Town Hall episode number 6. So again, that's a little bit about the newsletter. Once you sign up, you'll get that once a week. The Kickstarter, there's a link to the Kickstarter. You can see it here. It has a nice video. The game is, as Bill Thomas has shown you in these Town Hall meetings, he has a lot of games that are done in the warehouse. This is another one. So you actually see the unboxing or preview of the entire game with the finished components, and just by watching that video on Kickstarter. So you can get a better idea about Cradle Civilization. So I definitely urge you to please check it out when you can. But again, today we're going to be obviously focusing on a specific title, as you can see here. I just want to take this moment before we start. I want to welcome those I see posting online. So if you're on Facebook or YouTube, there might be a slight delay. But as we do the broadcast tonight, I really encourage you to ask your questions of Chris Fawcett. If you have any questions about his design, factors that went into the design, any design decisions. Is this feature in the game or not? We usually get a lot of questions about, is this reproduced in the game with some game mechanic? We'll talk about solitaire play and a bunch of other things, but let me just take a moment to recognize Andy, Charles, Robert, Andrew, Stephen, Tom D, Richard, E4 Airman, and Keith Powell. That's everybody so far on the broadcast. We're almost at 50 people already. So again, thanks for joining our live stream. We really appreciate it. And with no further ado, what do you say? Let's get right into it. We have a lot to cover. So let's go ahead and let's introduce and welcome Chris Fawcett. How are you doing tonight, Chris?
I'm doing great, John. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you. Obviously, we have a very special focus for tonight. Fall of Tobruk, Rommel's Greatest Victory. It's available for pre-order right now on the Compass website, but we're obviously going to go a bit deeper into the game, and this is the very first time that our viewers will see a lot of the components that Shane Logan has been working on with you for this release. They are not posted to the website yet, only the front box cover, and that's it. So we're going to cover a lot of components, a lot of eye candy is going to happen tonight, which I think is always a lot of fun, that we can talk about your system with the components. But before we get into Fall of Tobruk, tell us a little bit about what you did with Compass earlier. You had another release with Compass, so I thought maybe now's a good time if you want to talk a little bit about that as well.
Well, it's kind of interesting you brought that up, because there's a bit of shared history there between what I'm doing now and my interest in the previously published game Bar Lev. And the background, I guess the backstory for both of these new editions is fairly similar. I remember enjoying these games when I was in high school, junior high school even, yeah. and just had such fond memories of them, and they just gave me such a great enjoyment then. And I've gotten a little bit more sophisticated, maybe even a little cynical at my age about, it'd be nice if these were actually accurate simulations too. And that's really what kind of inspired the work that I did on Bar Lev, and I suppose is also informing my desire to put this other one together as well.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the game. So I'm actually gonna let me just show everybody a little bit about what we're going to be talking about here in a moment. So again, here, Fall of Tobruk. So everybody's probably seen the cover art since I just posted it earlier this week. But what it actually covers, can you talk a little bit about what this game covers?
Well, this is dealing with the Gazala battles that occurred in late May and early June 1942 around the port town of Tobruk. And the Gazala battles was, it's been termed Rommel's Greatest Victory, and I coined that to be the subtitle for the game. But in this one, there was a desperate battle. There was a very bold and daring plan to outflank the British fortified line, get around into the backfield of that formation, as it were, and defeat the British armor. And then turn on to Tobruk, and then and then once you take Tobruk, and then it's the Suez Canal was your next stop. That was the strategic plan Rommel had, and he had he had some great success with it eventually, but it wasn't the total success that he'd hoped for, because he didn't end up destroying enough of the British army, and it was able to reassemble itself a little bit later in the campaign at Alam Halfa, and then Montgomery took over, and then you had El Alamein, et cetera, et cetera. Anyone who follows the North Africa campaign can follow along with that. But this was a pivotal point, not necessarily a decisive battle, because, like I said, he didn't destroy the Eighth Army, but he gave it a knockout blow that took it out of action for quite some time. However, he, even in this battle, he was at independent logistics tether, and without having Tobruk taken, as he tried a little bit earlier in the previous fall, he tried to bypass Tobruk, take it on the fly, didn't make it. The British garrison hung on, and he wasn't really able to get into Egypt at all, because he had this thorn in his side. So he knew he needed to take Tobruk this time around, and he was prepared, as were the British, the Empire forces. Quite prepared for a very, very titanic struggle for this port city. In the reality, it wasn't. It was kind of like anticlimactic. He took it in a day.
Yeah, they
And
took it very. Yeah, I remember that. They actually took it very fast. It was
thunderous,
anticlimactic.
a thunderous silence, if you will, befell the British headquarters as they were stunned. You know, they expected it to last for months. Well, they fell back and regrouped and came back just like they did last time.
Well, that's
Didn't
great.
happen anyway.
Yeah. So that's a good backdrop. So I think we've given, and I think a lot of viewers here probably have a good background on North Africa and the Gazala. So that's a great recap of what transpired, which this simulation is recreating. But let's now focus more on the game itself.
Okay.
Obviously, people are aware that there's been the Fall of Tobruk has been published in at least two editions. And what I want to make clear to everybody is
my old high school copy here.
there you go. There's the nice big one, Conflict Games, and then I believe Todd Davis, cool stuff, did a version of it as well. But let's give them some background on how you approach what the evolution of the game is for you, and how similar is the game, or how different is this game from any of these previous editions.
Well, I think, as I mentioned, I was looking for an angle to update the orders of battle and make sure that, you know, what was engaging on my tabletop was the forces engaging there were the correct ones, and that I got into a lot of additional research around the orders of battle, found that much information has since come to light that needed the order of battle to be corrected. I don't know if you remember the Avalon Hill Tobruk game where the individual pieces were tanks and all that. Well, that had absolutely I wouldn't say ridiculous orders of battle in it, but there were things that entered our collective consciousness about truths about that part of the campaign, that time frame, that just weren't true. A number of those vehicles weren't even around. So I just wanted to make sure that I was trying to put together a good order of battle, and that started stretching out into. I'm seeing a little bit of disconnect between the old units and strengths and artillery ranges and what have you. And so I started looking at the system itself, the systems in the game, and that led to considerable redesign of it. Not that there was anything wrong with the original game. Like I said, I enjoyed that Frank Chadwick game so much. Frank is one of my favorite designers. I'm not going to do him any disservice on his design and speak ill of it. It was a ton of fun. I was looking for something a little bit more simulation-y than pure game, and that's what led me to this redesign effort. However, I just do want to mention that I was in contact him in the early stages of my rework, and he really encouraged me to continue. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah, now Frank's been really helpful for various projects, and yeah, I think one lesson learned from Barlev, and you know, that's maybe on me. So it wasn't clear to some buyers that it was not a straight reprint of you know, Barlev was not a straight reprint of the original Barlev game. So obviously we've taken extra steps with the advertising on the product page and the game title, that this is absolutely, should be considered a brand new design. You know, getting, like you said, simulation value, going deeper into the details, which we're going to cover tonight. And this is sort of a heads up for everybody that's viewing live tonight, is now's probably a good segue to get your questions ready, because we're going to start going through looking at behind the scenes. We're going to look at some of the components to the game that are involved, and to help us do that, to you know, really start looking for the show and tell part, is I want to introduce Shane Logan here just for a moment. So give him a chance to get settled in here. So Shane, by way of introduction, Shane Logan is the artist for this game, The Fall of Tobruk. He's also done artwork for many other games. You can look up his many contributions on Board Game Geek for sure. He's also designer and the game designer, and also all the graphic work for Old School Tactical.
Good
from
stuff.
Flying Big Games, which is great stuff. So, so Shane, thanks for joining us tonight. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, no problem. Hey, Chris.
Shane, it's really good to see you.
So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put Chris in a little smaller box, as the resolution of the camera I think he is having a little trouble there, but we can see a little better in a smaller box there, Shane. So that's a little better for you, I think. But I want to thank you in advance, Shane. They haven't seen the artwork yet, but I think you've done just an incredible job on the project so far. We've got a lot of the stuff is done. We announced the counter sheets, which we'll be showing tonight, are all at the printers right now, getting started. And let's do a little bit of show and tell now that Shane's here. How's that sound, Chris? How's that sound to you? Good?
We've got some great stuff to share.
All right, so here what I'm going to show, and I might just hide everybody for a moment. I want to zoom in to show the game map. It's actually 2 game maps with quite a bit of overlap. So I've got the dimensions of the 2 maps together is actually listed on the product page. I'm not looking at the product page right now. I want to guess it's 40 by 32, but I might be off a little bit. But the total overall actual size for the table when you overlap the games is listed on our website. Let me zoom in here just a little bit, give everybody a little bit of a better chance. And we're only at 23% resolution here. So let me go in here. And again, this is the handiwork of Shane, who's done just a terrific job capturing the desert landscape at the time. So I'm just going to zoom in quite a bit here just to give everybody a chance to sort of take in some of the artwork we have here. You can see the minefield belts, obviously. And Shane, maybe you can tell us a little bit just about the process for doing the game map, settling on the terrain types, how you decided to go about doing the map sheet. Can you share with us a little bit about your work on the map?
Well, basically, it's a lot of the desert's pretty drab, so you got to do what you can to get some life into it. And I start with the base levels. I try and get some texture on that. And then there's just a lot of just coming up with the right look for the different elements.
Yep, absolutely. And thank you also. It's a very iterative process to let everybody know. As far as most projects we work at with Compass, it's quite iterative in design. You're seeing a latter stage map here where we were able to focus on the off-map displays. You're starting to see the off-map displays on the borders here, as you can see. But again, it's going to be 2 full-size maps with some considerable overlap again. And again, don't quote me, I might be wrong, but I want to say it was something along the lines of 40 by 32. But again, we're making some final, I know we're making some final changes to the map, but we're very close to getting there. So hope everybody likes what they see. Thank you, Ardwolf Lair, for mentioning you like it. Mo, thanks for mentioning that. Steve, yes, the box cover, that is definitely compliments as well of Shane. So that is all Shane's work here. So I can go back here just for a moment on the box cover, which you can see on the product page right now. It's the only thing we have right now, but really evocative. I think Chris was telling me earlier he saw a version of this tank somewhat with somebody. What did you say, Chris? It was somebody sticking out of the hatch. There was another second character.
But it just speaks to Shane's creative touches here. That the photograph, the original World War II photograph, was a little washed out, and Shane really got it to pop here. Yeah, he got that crew member who was sticking his head out that hatch door. He got him to go back inside for this shot, though. That was really nice.
Should have ran a promo. Anybody who buys 3 copies or more gets their headshot in the shoot, right? Lost opportunity. Lost opportunity there. So the map we've covered. So and Shane, please stay here if there's any questions for you. We're seeing a lot of nice comments for you, as you can see here from Robert. You do his favorite artwork in the hobby, which says a lot. So big kudos to you, Shane, from Robert Moffat. Andrew, as you can see here, loves the box cover. So, and then understandable with what you've done with Old School Tactical, people that are familiar with your work and Old School Tactical. And again, we don't want to forget that's your design. That's your own game design as well. So got to give you extra dibs there. So wonderful what you've done, Shane, on this project. So kudos. I want to make sure you see those kudos. Let's talk about the counter sheets. We've got 5 counter sheets. So the way we're going to handle the counter sheets here is I'm going to let you, Chris, try to do a elevator pitch on. I'm going to zoom way in so you can talk about the values.
Let's show some tanks now. Move on down to some tanks.
Okay, we're going to move down to some tanks. You want some sex appeal here. So I'm going to let you walk the viewers through what these values on the tank units represent. That'd be great.
Well, it's a lot of this design element is inspired, and it comes straight out of Shane's head. I had some different interpretations and different implementations of these, but what we see here is a really solid presentation, in my opinion. Now, there are a number of values along the bottom of each counter. You can't see where the counters separate, but you imagine those lines in there. And we also have the, come on, get those tanks. Look at this. Valentines are marvelous. So at the top left, there is a box and the box color has something to do with the unit's proficiency in combat. The box itself has the stacking value, that's the number. The letter is the starting morale value. So there's a lot of information packed in that little square, and that's one of the nicest things Shane did, was pull it together into a cohesive a presentation of data on the counter that doesn't clutter things up. It is super, super clean, and that will help, I think, improve playability over the course of the game quite a bit. Now, the bottom row is your more typical attack, defense, movement kind of factors, but since this is a game of different hardware, there's armored targets and there's non-armored targets. So there's going to be armored attack vectors and non-armored attack vectors. So can you just scroll up a little bit and bring in one of these guys up above that's not armored? Yeah, there you go. So just compare it so we can see a tank unit and a non-tank unit. So you can see for these, for example, the Matilda, the 2146 of the 42nd Royal Tank Regiment there, A Company, that is an armored. It has an armored attack value of 2, and it's got a non-armored attack value of 1. So, or a hard attack strength of 2 and a soft attack strength of 1. You know, remember those tanks were armed with the 2-pounder gun, which really didn't have an HE capability, so it doesn't have a really strong effect against infantry directly. But it's a pretty solid armored target. That's one of the heaviest tanks on the board, is the Matilda, and it has a really robust defense factor. For example, if it were trying to shoot it itself, it could only get a 1 to 2 because of that 2 attack strength against the 4 defense strength. Now, so if we look up above, though, there's a unit, motorized infantry unit, 23412, the 1st Sherwood Foresters. That's what that represents. Okay. Now, all these abbreviations, by the way, are going to be in the rules, so we can get all that historical flavor back out of them. Yep. But it has an attack strength of 2 because it was armed with the little 2-pounder anti-tank guns as well. But it has a soft attack strength of 3, which means it can engage other types of infantry with that value. It's got a defense strength of 4, and it has a movement allowance of 12. Now, the tank's movement allowances of 6 are in white, which means those are tracked. So we make a differentiation between, well, how do you get around? You're either tracked, or in the case of the black ones above, the infantry and the artillery, well, they're driven around with trucks, so they're wheeled. And there's another type with those guys that are walking, which is a lot of the Italians and some other allied units. They have a different movement value for leg, and so the whole structure there is tied together, but the presentation is super clean. So and it's a pretty typical layout. Otherwise, you've got the artillery. You had an artillery unit there, and I just wanted to.
Oh, do you want to see that for a second? Okay.
Sorry, I should have jumped on that earlier, but
here's one right here. Here's an artillery for you.
Right, the artillery. They have 2 values in the upper right, and that is a bombardment strength and then a range.
Yeah, bombardment strength and the range. Yeah.
Yeah, the 7 medium is a good long range guns that that the British had available. Now, the defense strength of 1 means you better protect those guns. With somebody else, you don't want a roaming tank to run, go and overrun them. So you've got all sorts of different combined arms scenarios that you have to pay attention to.
Let's do this. Let's just to give everybody a breadth of, again, the order of battle, folks expect a really detailed order of battle, absolutely here, but just to give you a breadth of all. And I should have mentioned this up front, because there's quite a few values on here, and you should notice the spacing's pretty good. That's because these are 5/8 inch counters. So these are large counters. That's why we have 2 map sheets. So obviously you don't have counters sticking way outside the hex outlines. They're all going to fit very comfortable on the map. That's one of the first things we do with any project is we do the map first for size, and then we do the counter sizes to see the best fit. So these are very nice large counters. That's why you only see 8 per row. That's your 5/8 inch. But again, you can see a lot of air units here. We're going to talk more about air units in a moment, but you can see the breadth of units. All the armor are done as AFVs, and then the 2 sides are facing each other as well. So they're facing off against each other, how the AFV units, tank units are facing on the counters themselves. So we've got all that detail captured. So let's look at counter sheet number 2. I'm not showing any backs tonight. I'm just in the interest of time. So let's switch over to counter sheet number 2, Chris, and walk us through counter sheet number 2 for a moment.
Okay. Well, this counter sheet 2 features the Italians, and the colors of all the units is something I really tried to keep close to the the historically accurate uniform colors. Well, these are desert uniforms, and the longer you've been in the desert, the whiter they're going to get. But the basic design is that the British had the traditional khaki or variations of that. So you have Indian units, South African units, Australian units, yep. Free French, Italians, and Germans here. So the Italians had their kind of ochre color for their uniforms, and you can see some samples of some Germans right there below it. But this is the entire Italian order of battle for the game, including a rather sizable air contingent.
Yeah, it looks that way. Yeah, almost 40, 35.
They provided more aircraft for the battle than the Germans did.
I didn't realize that. Good to know. Let's look at counter sheet number 3.
Mm-hmm. The balance of the Germans shows the 2 armored divisions and the 90th Light Division plus their air contingents. And over on the right side is they might look like Italians, but they're a different shade entirely. Those are the South Africans.
Yeah, I can sort of tell the AFVs are facing the direction of the oncoming Germans. So that's sort of a tip off that they're for the Allies.
And then down the bottom row on the right side are the very, very, very tanned Free French.
There you go.
For a while.
Very tan. I think we're going to get into game markers now, starting with counter sheet number 4.
And we've got 2 full sheets of double-sided game counter. So what appears on the back side is not necessarily what's on the front side, but we're here on this sheet, we've got a couple of rows of rack markers, which is in support of the combat and replacement system. As tanks are destroyed, you leave them on the map under these, or you put these rack markers on there as an off-bat box, you transfer them in, because tank recovery was hugely important in the desert, and even more so in this game. So there's a mechanic in there for you to be able to bring destroyed tanks back into service, because it might have been that they lost a track. They can't fight today, but they can fight tomorrow if you can fix them. Then the Germans had a definite advantage in this regard, even over their Italian allies. Then we've got a couple of rows of markers for the air display showing airbase capacities and damage. Some markers for the units dealing with during the operations phase. Air control markers, some minefield breach markers, and then a few other miscellaneous markers on this one.
Okay, let's look at the last counter sheet real quickly. Counter sheet 5. Again, these are just the fronts only. There's obviously more markers, different markers on the back, but we just want to show the fronts in the interest of time.
And on this last page, we've got some more operations phase markers, movement complete, combat complete kind of thing, and then some markers for out of supply. Love Shane's use of the empty jerry cans. That's brilliant. Because that's really what it was all about. It was about petrol. The units really didn't run out of food or rations or ammunition even during this battle, which lasted only about a month, but gas was a big problem for them. So that's really evocative of the true situation, and I really appreciate his selection there. And I've got some morale loss markers here. As units get engaged in combat, they're going to get ground down. And the longer they're in battle, the more their morale drops. And if it gets too weak, they'll get easily eliminated. So you're encouraged, without getting too much detail here, you're encouraged to pull units out of the fight and let them rest.
Gotcha.
And the game pacing does allow for that.
Gotcha. So let's do this because there's a lot of components in this game, as folks are going to learn quickly here. Very, very rich game. A lot of again, full order of battle, very well researched. We're going to do a quick flyby on a lot of the other components, just in the interest of time, because I want to leave time to talk about the game system. And as we talk about the game system, maybe I'll bring back something later where we have more time to look at it. But I want to just quickly, and in the interest of Shane's time here, I know it's later for Shane, so just want to have Shane on here because he's done all the fine work here. So I'm just going to do a quick review of some of the remaining work here. So we'll start with the air screen. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what the air screen's all about. Not too much detail, but what the purpose of the air screen is. Just an elevator pitch, Chris.
This is designed for the full 2-player game where you're using the full air system, and there's a lot of limited intelligence between the 2 players and where air units are based, where their missions are headed, and where on the battlefield they're going to show up. So that there's going to be a little screen here that contains all the air games tables to obscure the information on the 2 air displays.
We'll talk more about solitaire play here in a moment. Here's the first air. Here's an air display, which looks like it needs a moment to render here because we've got a map. It's a PDF with a map in it. So let me try to shrink this down a little bit. Maybe you can give a quick elevator pitch on this display. Oh, out of memory, of course. Well, hopefully it will render. I don't know. Maybe
it's got some information there about the airbase capacities for the different air sectors, and it's got some holding boxes for placing the units onto their mission boxes in the various air sectors, as well as their home bases. And it's got the target air sectors of the other side. So basically, you've got the map itself and the air sectors associated with the map. Plus, there's some off-map air sectors. It goes from from Benghazi almost to Alexandria. The scope of the air game.
Yeah, apologies to everybody with the screen rendering. I've got some pretty massive files, PDF.
Yeah,
so
you've got everything
right now. So my laptop is crying right now with multiple applications running right now. But yeah, hopefully this gives a good sense or idea of one of the displays here for everybody. Then we've got some generic displays, of course. So we've got some player aid cards for both sides. So they'll be duplicated. They'll be duplicated, of course.
Double-sided there, yeah. The train effects chart and the command span chart and what have you on the second page, as well as I've got some different zones of control effects. So the more troops you've got into a hex, the heavier your ZOC is, but the more susceptible to that hex is to artillery bombardment. So it's a trade-off. If you're trying to cross those minefields, you've got to basically attack through them. There's a risk going there.
Absolutely. And then
on the play aid one is the big combat results table, and that's going to take some discussion there because it doesn't look like a normal combat results table.
Looks like here we have a specific line for artillery barrages only, and then air only on the integrated combat results table here.
Right. The artillery has an impact. They have a separate impulse possibility, and they would resolve based upon their bombardment strike. Or if you've got a few of them firing together, you can add them together and get yourself a higher odds column on that. But there are some limitations on what you can do with the artillery barrage. You're not really able to force the enemy out of the hex. All you can get them to do is get disrupted, maybe weaken their strength, get them to put their heads down. Versus actually getting at them, close combat, hand-to-hand sort of thing, where you getting in there and trying to take the location as well as destroy the enemy. Air similar.
Can you get a sense of how busy we've been keeping Shane for the past few weeks and months? It's a lot of material in here, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. So here, this I really like. I like the icon treatment for the tank tracks where you show the actual silhouette by the type of AFE. I think that was a really nice touch here. Can you explain this really quickly, Chris, what we're capturing here with these tracks?
Yeah, on that one counter sheet, the fourth counter sheet, I mentioned the rec markers. Well, those are going to show up here. So if I'm using, if I lose a Panther unit on a particular combat, I'm going to take one of my rec markers out of my rec holding box, and it's going to go onto the map in that location, and that unit that was lost gets dropped into the correspondingly numbered box here. Now, if I'm able to recover that, and by the way, that's going to sit on the map until either the enemy burns the wreck, they destroy the marker, and permanently kills that tank. The marker goes back to the box, the tank goes to the permanently eliminated. But if I'm able to repair that as the German player, I can then increase my reserve tank track marker by one value for that model. And if I lose, say if it's a Panzer III, it's a Panzer III that I lost. If I have another Panzer III that's waiting in the units to be refit, or it's waiting to get fixed, I can use that reserve tank track step and bring it back into play.
And then, of course, for the allies, same thing for the allied side. And again, we've got the silhouettes for each tank type, which matches the counters, of course, that Shane did. So same concept here. Now, I believe the allies, is it true in your game, the allies have a little bit more trouble with the tank recovery as occurred historically at all?
It's not that the allies and the Italians, they have very similar limitations, that their workshops weren't up at the front lines, and they didn't really have those kinds of arms readily available. They were in the back in depots and what have you. The Germans had a lot of that moving forward, mobile repair shops and what have you. So they were very efficient with getting those tanks back into action almost immediately. So they get free recovery, and it's much easier for them to recover than the Allies. It's not hard for the Allies. It's just much easier for the Germans. So that allows them to keep their tank strength up, even though in a historical battle and in this game, you're going to lose lots of tank pieces, because that's really where your cutting edge is on combat. So tanks are going to be littering the map, and your ability to seize the ground and recover the tanks is going to make the difference between whether you have more tanks to fight with in later turns or you don't.
Yep, exactly. And then if you think Shane's work's over now, guess what? You're wrong. There's more. So we're going to switch over here to some more content that Shane's done, starting with the Axis Order of Battle. So maybe you can walk us through this display a little bit, Shane, what we're seing. I'm sorry, Shane, for Chris rather. Can you walk us through what yeah, I know Shane did all the work. I'm letting him rest.
Well, this is going to be a combination, kind of a counter manifest and setup chart, so that you can place the counters on here and use the setup instructions and put them directly onto the map from here. The order of battle here, we had Panzer Army Africa, which is what Rommel was in command of. He did not command the Africa Corps. He was one level up above the Africa Corps command by this time. But so we've got his headquarters and all the attached army level units. And by the way, those dark, those black V shapes, those are the 88s. So each one of those is a battalion of 88s.
Right
that's
there.
a bunch of guns, yeah, and there's
guys.
a whole bunch of those coming in. What's surprising, if you take a look at the next one with the Italians, let's look. They had 88s too.
Let's see. Oh yeah, right here. Okay, I see him. I see one right here. There's one right there.
When the Germans come down here, and the Germans gave them a bunch of 88s to use.
Yeah, I see. There's 1, 2, 3. Yeah, there's a few units there. I see at least 3 units of 88s right there. Okay.
The Italians actually started manufacturing those guns under license during the war, but these are German 88s that the Italians manned quite successfully and quite effectively.
And to let everybody know, I think some people said one pain point they experienced was they wanted displays, order of battle displays for Barlev. So that was a lesson learned for me. So that's what you're getting here, is you're getting order of battle displays. And then we have separate scenario rules with the map. The map's very clear on where each of these formations would set up. So you've got very clear graphical based instruction on where these units would go. And then I definitely want to show the Allies here. I believe I have them as well.
8th Army.
There you go, 8th Army. Yep.
They have a couple of displays, but it shows the 30 Corps and the 13th Corps plus all the the attached units that come in, and there's a bunch of reinforcements that were in between the battlefield and the Suez Canal that the British were able to tap into, mostly Indian troops that they got to reinforce the battlefront. Yeah.
And now let's get into the air. Now we're getting into the air orders of battle. So let's walk us through this one.
Each unit's a squadron, and squadrons, of course, varied in strength between fighters and bomber squadrons. But I settle on the squadron strength, and there's some information on each of these. We didn't get into just explaining what the values were on the counters here, but I have a.
Let's do it now, real quick.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I'll zoom in as hopefully that will work. So we'll stop there.
Pictures that Shane did. So there you see some. Oh,
there you go.
There we go. There's some of the excellent Italian Mach-E fighters, the C-202s, which were better than what the British were fielding at the time. They were barely under the Messerschmitts in capability, and the pilot quality wasn't really that significantly lower either. So we've got at the top, we've got a couple of half moons. Well, that just means that these guys don't have full strength in those categories. If you find some bombers, scroll over to the left. We'll show some bombers. You can see them. Yeah, so the Wellies, for example, they have a 1 dot on the left side and 3 dots on the right side. The Hurricane down below, a 1 dot on the left, a half a dot on the right side. The left side dot, that's for combat support, and the right side dot is for bombardment. So the Wellingtons are really great at bombing airfields.
Yep.
Not so much If you go find the Stukas, you're going to see a completely different reversal of the dots there. The Stukas are perfect for ground support, but not so much for level bombing against fixed targets. The aircraft are beautiful. The values on the bottom, there's an air attack value, which means I'll shoot at you with that value, and you'll shoot back at me with, I'll defend with the middle value. So the Wellington 1B2 means if one of those Italian planes were fighting with the 4-4s, the 4 would shoot at the 2, and then the Wellington's 1 would shoot back at the defense strength of 4 for the fighters. Probably not going to do much damage to the fighters, but it might knock a couple of them down. And of course, the last value there in blue is the range.
Okay, great. So I think that's a great recap. So thanks, Chris, for covering that. Shane, I have to applaud you on the counters, the silhouettes for the air. You're getting applause from the viewers here. They're just loving the air silhouette. So awesome job there. So let's see if we have anything. I can't remember now if there's anything left to show here. I think that's what I had. Nope, that Allied. Yes, there's the Allied. We just covered that, so we looked at those. So yeah. So again, you got the Axis and Allied. That was, I believe, our last display. So lots and lots of stuff in here. So I think with this, you can all see what Shane's meant to this project. I think it's Shane underscores the truth. Really, is that the artwork for a game can really enhance it. Just not in terms of aesthetics, but also to make the game very user friendly. So Shane helped do a lot of guidance, and we did a lot of iterations on where to put the values, how they should be done from a mnemonic standpoint. How do we show all these different things, what they mean? So I want to give a hat tip to Shane, to you on that, Shane. And
I'd just like to say that Chris had all this stuff just organized really well. Like, I basically put a pretty face on a lot of it, but he had everything just organized really, really well, and it was easy to work with what he had for me. So that made it a lot easier to go. And
you're humble as well. You're overworked, and you're humble. So for those wondering, yes, we're very privileged to have Shane working with us on other projects. He's, for example, working on many are anticipating Eastern Front Tank Leader. So he's finished the counter sheets for that recently. So we are making progress on Tank Leader for sure. So looking forward to your other contributions. But yeah, definitely a home run hit here, Shane. I think everybody's really happy with the job you did here. So I'm gonna let you go, Shane. It was a pleasure to have the artist here. This is the first time I've had the artist on, and I should have done it for other episodes, but I really thought, boy, the work you've put into this, I want to make sure we got you here on the broadcast, just so we could thank you for all your efforts. Chris, I don't know if you want a parting word with Shane here before I let him go.
I know we're not out of the woods yet, but your work so far has been marvelous. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
All right, Shane, you have a good night, Shane. I'm going to let you go.
Okay, talk to you later.
Bye-bye. So great. So appreciate everybody giving the big thumbs up to Shane there. I know he really appreciates that. So what I'd like to do here is answer a few questions. Some viewer questions have come in for you, Chris. So some comments, I think some mixed about Order of Battle questions and some other things. So let's bring in a few questions, and then we'll talk more in depth about some aspects of the game tonight. So let's start with Steve Overton. Steve Overton had a comment about, we mentioned the 88s. For the Italians, yep.
I ran across these in my Order of Battle as well. I think in the particular Order of Battle that we have, they did have some of the 90 millimeters, and I gave them the same functional capabilities in the game as the 88. So not all the heavy anti-tank guns are truly 88s. Some of those are those excellent 90, Italian 90s. But from all practical purposes, they were good, heavy flak AT guns.
Yeah, so it's a
no purpose, same sort of thing. I gave them the same functionality in the game. That's a good observation.
Yeah, and then Jack was hoping, it's too late, Jack. We're already at print with the counters. He was hoping for using the brackets. Yeah, we went back and forth on brackets or non-brackets. So I'm sorry to disappoint, Jack. I'm afraid that little slash is in there because the counters are already printed.
But, no, it was difficult to portray that in a really balanced way that did not distract. To put a dash in between. Well, is that a 2-1? I don't know.
Yeah, it was. We went through different iterations for sure.
About a vertical bar, and it was really a tough decision, Jack. Really tough.
Yeah, we had all kinds of fun. If you knew the kind of iterations and decisions and conversations we have, you guys would be like, "Are you guys nuts?" So,
Yeah, one kind of thing to talk about.
so Darren on over on Facebook, he's really impressed with Barlev, and it is a fairly heavy game. You know, it's heavy on it's definitely a true simulation game with overlapping systems as far as the overall complexity. How would you rate Fall of Tobruk in comparison if you were lifting?
Yeah. I'm not going to say Tobruk is lighter than Barlev. Not significantly anyway. And the reason for that is, you know, this is an evolution of something that started out as a simple, let's fix the order of battle, make new counters, and all of a sudden we're realizing that the model didn't really fit. The model of the scale of the original game, the ranges of the artillery there, and the scale of the map and all that. It really had some issues. And when I started to look at those rules were designed for a more of an abstract game, and I was getting a little bit deeper into the weeds. I would not rate this as a super complex game. Of course, if you are taking all of the parts in play, you're playing with the standard, or if you want to call them advanced air rules. I mean, the full air game, that's going to add a layer of complexity and time because you're bringing in more pieces of the game, certainly. Individually, those rules aren't difficult, but again, you know, you're building on these issues here, and that's a valid point. I didn't go out to design, you know, a North African checkers game, not to try to belittle your query or not, but I really wanted to get into the deeper end of the weeds, and as I just started discovering what went into a North African battle, I hadn't really seen a lot of games that took the things that I was discovering for myself to be the most important into effect. They were all, you know, kind of rehashing the, locking zone of control, movement phase, combat phase, you know, a whole brigade dies with one die roll kind of thing. It's not the kind of game that this is. The old Fall of Tobruk fell more into that category than this one, and this is the differentiator. This is has more robust systems.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, Compass, we do, as everybody knows, if you look at our catalog, we do games of different complexity scales, different design aims. And obviously, you know, it's great for those looking for detail and wanting to really immerse themselves in something where they feel like there's a return on investment for the time put into the mechanics. And I think it's more the decision making of the layers coming into play. I don't think the rules, I read the rules myself last night, again, a draft before layout, and I came away with the rules didn't look that complex to me, but I know the decisions to play the game can get pretty, which we're going to talk about here in a moment. I don't want to jump the gun here, but Eric has a question over on YouTube. Thanks for joining, Eric. So how long did it take you to design the game? And did you work on it from start to finish, or did you take some breaks to do some other things? What's the history as far as your time investment in this game?
When I think back a bit, this is something that the design of the game has been an evolutionary process for some time. Like I said, I started out with tweaking the orders of battle. Then, oh, good grief, that's probably been 20 years ago. And the more recent design work has probably been the last 2.5 years. So, and that's been fairly solid design work, a lot of play testing. Tried this combat system. You know, I tried actually overlaying the original combat system on the new scale and the new new map scale, and that didn't work. So I had to throw that out and come up with something different. The results just didn't, you couldn't get the historical results at all. And the actual final design here that I came up with, I'm not going to take credit for it. I lifted it from another one of my favorite systems. And I'm not going to say it right now, but
oh, you're not going to say what your favorite system is? Really? You're not going to let the cat out of the bag?
Because it's an American Civil War game, and you wouldn't think there's very many parallels between them. But the mixture between the hardware, the morale, and the training, all three of those pieces come together in this combat system, and that's what I loved about it. And that's what I wanted to adapt here. You've got your hardware factors. You've seen the tank counters, and we have differentiation between the unit types and the hardware on purpose because that makes a difference. Then we've got the the proficiency level, and then we've got morale level too. So you lose morale level as you fight longer and longer. So even the best, most veteran units are going to get ground down, if not outright eliminated. You know, that they don't lose all their tanks, they don't lose all their hardware. The men are going to get ground down.
And the complexity level, I know we have a rating over on the website for complexity, but the way I look at it, as I mentioned yesterday, I really took a close look at the rules draft last night, and I didn't come away with an impression that anything was overly complex. Like, I read the rules, and every rules case was very easy to follow. You know, every key module to the game, you know, and I should mention for everybody, the air game that comes standard is like the richly detailed air game, because that's Chris as a designer. Chris has created this body of work where that standard game has everything in it, but then there's also an optional simplified air system, which obviously works for solitaire players, because we had air screen earlier, and that's just the one aspect of the design that would throw a little a wrench at solitaire play, is perhaps the standard detailed air system. But then you have this.
Well, yeah, hidden air units would make it difficult. Anytime you have hidden units in there, solitaire playability seems to go down. But so I've introduced some a basic and / solitaire air system that takes all the airplanes and sets them aside, takes those air displays and sets them aside. You focus on the ground game, and then there are a set of tables that you would be able to get the impact of the air game into your battle. So it distills down into some simplified die rolls. Each turn you come up with an air, who's got air superiority, who's got you know, in what sectors, who can bring their bombers to bear on the ground combat. And then you roll and see, can I get more airplanes than you this time around? You know?
I'd say, Martin, hang on if you can, Martin, tonight. I don't know what time zone you're in, but we're going to cover some of the other aspects of the game. But again, my take is I don't see this as an overly complex game, but I think there's a lot of decisions, and I think it's a very intricate system. There's a lot of layers to the game as far as decision making going on that we're going to get into here in a moment for sure. So please bear with us. So with that, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about some aspects of the game system. So I know we have activations, but the way I want to approach this question, which is sort of the pillar of the design of how things start to happen, is I actually want to focus on the impulse system. There's 4 impulses. There's artillery, air, movement, and combat to the game. Could you talk about the basic construct of activations, and specifically what happens during an activation with these 4 impulses, and what decisions players will be making as far as these impulses go?
Right. Whenever and this is a chip pull game, which the original one was not. The original game had all the Axis got to move all their pieces, then the Allied got to move all their pieces. But what happened within that, the thing that made this game stand out for me then, was the fact that you could move units as one side and then conduct combat. And then you would move other units and then conduct combat, and then move other units and conduct combat. So it was a little bit more fluid. The phases weren't abrupt. I got to move all my guys. Now I got to have all my fights. So the thing that I changed there was, well, let's make it a little bit more fluid, because all of the stories we hear about North Africa, you know, they weren't trench warfare. They were very, very fluid. So we have a chip pull system to activate units by formation. And those formations, when they're activated, you will have a variable number of activations. There's a command and control table you roll on, depending on the type of headquarters you're activating. Then you're allowed to activate a certain number of stacks of that formation's pieces. And what you do with those activated stacks is entirely up to you as the player. Now, those 4 impulses that were listed, there was an air impulse, there was an artillery impulse, there was a movement impulse, and there's a combat impulse. Well, for each activation, this can be totally different. The mix and the order of all of those can be completely different, and that is entirely stack by stack. So I can have this stack move, for example, and then I can call in an airstrike on an adjacent enemy to try to soften it up, and then I can have another stack move and have an artillery barrage on those guys there too to soften them up some more, and then I can bring up a third stack, have another movement impulse, and then finally have a combat impulse. Well, all 3 of those stacks jump in on, you know, what's left. So you can customize your player turn, and that's That's the big thing that's different. And perhaps that's where the game's complexity really comes from. It's not rules heavy, but it's brain heavy. You need to have a plan. And that perhaps is the biggest change between this game and other games that I've seen, certainly on the Gazala battles. I'm not trying to say that, hey, this is the revolutionary new system is going to throw all the other game systems on its ear. I love all systems. I'm going to play every game that I can get my hands on. But this one is going to require people to not just, automatically just move all my pieces because that's the phase I'm in. That's what the turn sequence is telling me to do. I'm going to choose to crack this particular nut this way. And I got to get these guys out of this box behind the minefield. I got to dig them out. They're hiding underground. So how do I do that? Oh, I need to start throwing artillery on there to get them their heads down so they don't shoot back at me when I move my troops up. And when I engage them in close combat, I've got to be able to get those engineers up there to get rid of that minefield in front of me, so I'm not going to be penalized with that. So that's all part of that movement to contact thing. And do I have enough troops to make this an effective attack? He's got anti-tank guns there. I'm not going to have a tank charge, unless, of course, I'm the British, in which case that's probably the only thing I can think of doing, based upon their historical performance, that is. Yeah. We're smarter than that. We're going to be able to use our tools a little bit better.
Can you share a little bit more, Chris, about the combat system in the game? You've mentioned combat quite a bit, especially with deciding on impulses, how to soften targets. And you've got those decisions to make, but maybe just some basics of what kind of considerations are happening in the combat resolution itself.
Well, just on a regular combat impulse, if I decide, okay, now it's time to go ahead and have those 3 stacks make their attack. What you do there is an anti-tank fire segment, which is where those any tanks that are on the attacker side or the defender side, both sides, will receive anti-tank fire from units that have those hard attack strengths. So those 88s may be taking a shot at those Matildas, for example. But all the anti-tank fire, there is a possibility of a first fire, which represents those longer range guns, those 88s. And the Grants actually had an extended range over the Germans as well. So they get a first fire opportunity. So the longer ranged guns will have an opportunity, or maybe those guys that are on top of a hill. There are some terrain considerations with that first fire as well. So I can take a first shot at you if I've got better anti-tank guns. 6-pounders, for example, they fall in that category. And this is the first battle where these really made an impact. So these have a tactical impact as well in that first fire capability. Once you take the first fire, and then all the survivors can make their simultaneous fires. And that smacks a lot like Barlev, because I think Frank Chadwick developed that system in his redesign of the Barlev game, from which mine was derived, came from the Fall of Tobruk game. So there's some parallels there too. The web is woven quite intricately here. After you do the simultaneous fire, then there's a close combat segment, and that's where the non-armored units go at each other. Yep. And then that one is both sides shoot at each other in a combat segment. This is not me shooting at you, rolling at the die, and the defender is the only one that's going to get hurt. This one, both sides are going to take some losses. There's morale checks to be made. There's disruptions to be made. You get disrupted twice, you're killed, you're eliminated. So a small stack of units can get overrun by a whole bunch of tanks, and just because they don't have enough steps to absorb all that. There's no step loss, though. If you're disrupted at the end of the day, at the end of the phases, I flip you back over. That's a temporary loss of cohesion. You're going to get that back. But if you take a morale loss, well, you're going to have to spend a little bit of time with that loss. You have to get back in and recover that. So a normal combat impulse, you got anti-tank fire, you got the big guns shooting first in the first fire segment, then everybody else gets to shoot as you start to close the gap. And then applying those results, you might have some units got retreated or they got disrupted on the way in, so their impact on the close combat isn't going to be as great. And then we get into the firing against the soft targets. So the infantry and the artillery get in there, and the assault guns and what have you. And the tanks, the close support tanks, like the German Panzer IV had a great close assault support gun. On that 75, it has short range, so that can't do first fire on the anti-tank segment, but it's pretty deadly on that close combat segment.
Great. And then actually I wanted to mention too, as far as back to the complexity, there's some subsystems in the game that you've purposely not put too much focus or emphasis on to keep the overall complexity, I think, very manageable. Like the supply rules are very simple.
Oh, yeah.
I think they're less than it's like maybe half of a page, or it's like there's certain mechanics that are definitely streamlined. There's definitely some streamlining that's taken place, but I want to cover one more broad-based area of the game, because I think this will, and I think this game just screams like after action report, like those great play narratives when people write these replays with all these rich decisions being made and all the planning and forethought that has to go into, and then resolving these engagements. I can already imagine what some of these replay articles how they could be written based on the actual decisions being made. But I think what's going to lend to that story is the air planning and missions in the standard game. So the standard game, again, is the more detailed. So that's part of the overall basic chassis, is a very nice, richly detailed air plan. It's got air planning and then the actual missions themselves. So and I'll make this the last, in the interest of time, this will be the last big topic about the game system itself. But I definitely want to throw some light on the air planning and missions you've created for this game. Well,
there are five missions that an individual plane can fly. There are two types of planes. There's a fighter squadron, there's a bomber squadron, and fighters can pretty much do any of the missions. They can go on bombing raids, but they might not have much effect if they're all they're carrying is machine guns and light bombs. And you're not going to throw bombers on a fighter sweep mission. So you're really going to limit the aircraft types to the roles that they were designed for. But like a fighter sweep is a mission where, and this was heavily embraced by all three air forces. They're the RAF and Allied air forces. The Italian Forza Armata. I'm terrible with it, but and the Luftwaffe. They all had these free hunting missions, and that was where the fighters just go looking for trouble. And that is a mission you can put them on now. So they're going to be roaming the sector looking for targets of opportunity. So if it's a lone combat support mission without an escort, and they find them, they'll jump them and probably chase them away or shoot them down. But they got to find them first. So there's a mission contact function in there too. So they're in a position. I'm in the same sector as you. I've got a complementary mission, but can I find you in that huge vastness of air above the desert? So there's a die roll there for a mission contact, and if I can't make it, I stay up in the air doing a fighter sweep because I don't know you weren't there. I didn't contact you, so I'm still looking for trouble. There's also a defensive patrol, which is not really a free hunting type of mission, but it's more of a CAP, a combat air patrol, over a fixed point like an airfield. So this allows me to keep some air fighters up and to protect the airfields. And the airfields, of course, are abstracted a little bit. The other missions, of course, we've got escorts. Fighters always need to be escorting bombers. Sometimes you want to be escort heavy, so hoping to find maybe an interceptor that doesn't realize he's going up against 30 fighters and only sends up 10 to intercept. They're surprised. You can surprise things, but surprise people with hidden deployment and hidden commitments. The combat support, that's for the direct support of the ground troops. Those are odd shifts on the ground for the combat, but there's also a strafing and a bombing mission. I mentioned strafing because fighters can do this as well, but you're going after ground targets, and it could be, well, historically it also included ports and shipping and things like that, but those are out of the scope of the game. They're abstracted away. So you could be going after the guys' air bases, or you can be hitting air unit or ground units, without intending to actually engage them in combat. It's not a combat support, but I still want to bomb them. This was a big tactic of the RAF and Allied air forces after the British tanks were taken out of the action. The British were starting to retreat. The RAF bombed the heck out of the German tank columns, causing them to halt and turn back away from Egypt. So they bombed them away. They were successful in a ground interdiction campaign. So you can do that in the game as well. You have all of those 5 missions, and you allocate your aircraft secretly to each mission, desired mission in the various air sectors. Now, combat support missions, you can't fly to Matru and do combat support because you're not going to have any ground troops there. So I've limited on the air displays what missions you can fly into what sectors. That's Shane has beautifully displayed that. So if I want to bomb the Matru sector and reduce the airbase capacity there, I just send my bombers in there, and we resolve them, and we've resolved the missions. And if there's damage on the capacity, we mark it on the air display. Air units might be killed on the ground.
Yep, and I think
no, it's okay. I think I've kind of worn it out there.
That's how you talked. No, we want to cover the different missions that are available, and then you mentioned the air planning, which the the solitaire play comment. We always at Compass like to talk about solitaire playability of games. We always look at that for consideration, whatever the game is. So obviously, you brought up the air planning that's done in secret. So that's the one aspect of the game. I believe you would agree that it's really meant for face-to-face or via VAS. It's two opposing sides, but then the simpler optional version dispenses with that, which would help for solitaire playability for sure.
Right. I mentioned that I've reduced it to a set of tables, so it's more of a probability. It takes into consideration the situation on the ground. For example, we're going to roll. There's 4 on-map air sectors, and they're very well marked on the map with borders on there. So, say the Tobruk sector, we're going to check to see who has air superiority there for the turn, or for the AM or PM turn. So for the AM turn, we're going to roll. We're going to look at, well, how many airfields do the Axis control? How many headquarters does the Axis have there? In other words, what's the concentration of forces, and therefore what's the commitment of the supporting air forces to that sector? So the more headquarters and the more owned airfields, controlled airfields, the bigger the modifier towards superiority level on that sector. So if you have superiority, you mark it, put a little marker in that sector. And if there's no superiority, it's contested, no marker goes in there. And then when it comes time to actually determine if you've got superiority and you're trying to do a combat support mission, which is the only thing you can do, you're just rolling to see if you're getting odd shifts. All of that interdiction is abstracted away. All of the bombing of airfields and ground troops is abstracted away. All we're getting down to is, can I put bombs into the faces of the defenders? Right. And that one, it's abstracted down to a die roll. It might be an unfavorable, meaning the other side got their bombers there and having an impact. If they've got air superiority and you're attacking in a sector where the enemy's got air superiority, they're probably going to be interfering with your plans a little bit. Yeah. Now again, this is solitaire, but it's also for anyone who wants to play it 2-player without the air unit overhead. Right. They just want to get in there. They want to drive tanks, and that's fine. And that I think
I agree that the optional air rolls serve a dual purpose clearly in the game. One is if you just want to take the amount of layers of systems taking place. If you want to simplify the air game, you can do that through the optional rules. So making that layer simpler and stripping it down so you can focus on the ground, absolutely. Or as you mentioned, this really helps address solitaire play because that planning that goes on secretively for the 2-player, we have to deal with that to make it solo friendly. And as we get ready to wrap, some comments here, like from John Allison. Thanks for joining, John, on Facebook. Great to see you here again. So, sounds like I think people are coming away with, there's a lot of rich detail here. There's multi-layers. I think War Steve over on YouTube might be expressing something that others might be thinking that this looks very complex. I want to reiterate, I don't think this is very complex. What I think is happening here, let me put it this way. This is not a one-map game where you can pick up the rules and start playing within 2 hours. So there's going to be some upfront investment in the rules, but not like a week or anything like that. It's nothing like a super complex game. It's maybe one night, like beforehand, reading the rules, and then the next day getting ready to get started. And the complexity of the game itself, there's no rules that I see that are complex. It's just the planning and the forethought because of the impulses that you've got. If you got the air game in there for the 2-player, obviously that's another layer. But the mechanics themselves are very streamlined. Like I don't think there's any mechanic in the game Except for maybe the air game was more than 2 pages because all the missions, you have the 5 missions you have to detail.
Yeah,
But this is not it's not a 50-page rule booklet or a 60-page rule booklet, or I don't want yeah, no. I don't want anybody to have that impression. So yeah, we don't want you to feel too intimidated by it. I would tell you, if a game was going to be intimidating, like, I would be upfront with you guys. I would say this is going to be a game with heavy rules, complex systems. It really isn't. It's just there's these different layers that are going on. So it's more of a time factor. There was a question around how much time will it take to play. I think it's on the website. It's around 8 to 10 hours, which is probably pretty fast. I think that's probably not being conservative. I would probably, if you're doing the standard game, Chris, I don't think 8 to 10.
If you've played the game before and you've got, and you really know how to construct a turn. I mean, the initial learning curve is going to be fairly steep. And I mean it's not going to be hard. I mean
how to use it, how to use the rules.
The steep learning curve, meaning you're going to learn a lot quickly and get to that plateau of understanding fast. Once you get to that point, that 8 to 10 hours is probably going to be accurate. But you've got two games, you've got an AM phase and a PM phase. Each one of these, all the formations on the map are doing their things. You're rolling for your command and control. How many stacks can I activate? Brian, that is huge. I'm going to pause it. I saw that comment. I thought that's a great implementation of how to functionally game a solitaire game in general. I mean, you can do that with any game. Draw up some plans and say, okay, we're gonna do this. We're gonna go to this objective, and then we get a die roll break. What happens when we go up from that objective? You can map it out with a kind of decision tree, or just draw up the whole thing with arrows across a copy of the map and all that. There's a lot of ways that you can make this game work for you in a solitaire manner and have a different experience every single time.
Yeah, and then just to remind everybody, here's the game itself. So it's available for pre-order today. Notice I've also got, I forgot, there is actually Shane, so nice of Shane. He did a nice 3D rendering of the box for us, so you had a better idea what the whole box is going to look like. But obviously you guys got to see a lot of the components. There's still some changes being made to some of them, but obviously the counter sheets, the 5 counter sheets are at the printers already. Maps basically done, just doing some final pass-throughs on that with the tables being added to it, etc. And then you saw all the charts and tables and the displays, etc. So you can see how it's coming together. The last part, we'll be getting the rules done and the rules layout. Somebody asked about scenarios for this game. I believe it's the main game campaign plus there's an earlier start before Rommel does that southward swing around Berikheim. Is that correct, Chris, as far as scenarios?
Right. That was it wasn't really a surprise for the British, because you can see dust clouds where everybody's moving their vehicles in the desert. Something's going on there. But the extent of it wasn't made clear to the British. They saw and Rommel did this big night flank march to get around the Bir Hakeim, the southern point where the Free French were garrisoning. He drove around the big right open desert flank, which was always a problem fighting in that theater, that there's always going to be an open flank. But that doesn't necessarily mean it was the best plan. It's just the plan he used that day. It actually turned out to almost be a disaster for him, because he started to run out of gas, and he had to turn around and attack a British brigade that was holding the line of the minefields, and have the Italians come through with the other side and force breaches, engineer breaches in that minefield to run those supply lines back to his troops. And that allowed him a chance to, recover, get some morale steps back, get some tank steps back. Everybody's back in supply. Let's resume the offensive. Had he been attacked while he was vulnerable there, the Germans they were in a cul-de-sac with enemy minefields all around them, 3 sides, and the British tanks that, if they had conserved their tanks and not penny packeted them away in piecemeal attacks, if they had conserved their forces and attacked when Rommel was weak and out of supply, it would not have been Rommel's greatest victory. It would have been Rommel's last battle.
Yep. So let me pose this question to you. So I think people are definitely engaged and interested and intrigued by the system that's going to be coming in this game, Fall for Tobruk, or Fall of Tobruk. So how would you answer the question from folks, if I really like this game system, is this going to be a one-off, or will there be a chance where this could be applied to other North African campaigns or battles, for example? So I think, once you learn and invest it, and if you love it, will there be an outlet to maybe try other battles or campaigns? Could you answer that question?
Already in the works is a 3-map game for the Crusader, Brevity, Battle Axe, all of the border battles at Halfaya Pass and all that, using the same system. And that would have been the previous fall. The game will not be the same because that was fought in the North African winter, which was wet. So we, different rule impacts, but the same basic game system was there. The hardware is not going to be the same because the main battle tank of the British at this time was the Stuart, and old 1939, 1940 designs. The Germans' hardware was pretty much the same. They didn't have the latest and greatest, but they had a few more tanks because they hadn't lost as many yet. But and the Italians didn't have their most recent medium tank yet in the field. So it's a little bit of a change in the hardware side, but the strategic situation is a lot different. In this one, the in the Crusader battles and the border battles there was a British division, a reinforced division already in Tobruk holding the line, while the Italians were investing in sort of a siege. Well, a siege of a supplied port isn't much of a siege, and then Rommel was keeping the Africa Corps and the Italian mobile forces in the space in between to try to keep the British armor from breaking through and relieving Tobruk, while they could go ahead and invest it and attack. Well, there were British preemptive counterattacks. Those are going to be little scenarios in the game, which is got a working title of Forgotten Victory. The victory, of course, of Crusader was the British. It was definitely a British win for the campaign. It wasn't a decisive victory. Perhaps that's why it was forgotten. But it did lead to Rommel having to lift the siege of Tobruk and retire all the way back to his supply lines way back outside of Cyrenaica. So the game. The Forgotten Victory game uses the same basic system, uses the same unit types. Everything's familiar. The order of battle is going to be slightly different because we're talking 6 months earlier, and weather rules are going to be a lot different because the clinging mud. You wouldn't think desert being a muddy place, but there are so many reports of airfields being totally flooded out by monsoon rains.
Right. Well, this was, absolutely. Well, that's I'm always excited about, could it be a series or could there be more games? So I'm really excited that, we've already got a home for the Operation Crusader, Brevity, Battle Axe, etc. I think that's fantastic. I think people know now tonight, those that were able to catch us tonight, they've got a much better idea about the project now for Fall of Tobruk. And it is a different system. It's a new design. So to be clear up front with people, it's more on the simulation side with an option out on the air game if you want to make that simpler. But solitaire versus multiplayer, it's got some versatility there. Absolutely. So I think with that, Chris, I think we're going to wrap up. So again, I think a tremendous job as well. Shane, who was on earlier, Shane's just done, it's really going to be a graphical, a feast. Anybody that's interested in North Africa, I think just the richness of detail, order of battle, the system itself, the decisions, and then having just that graphic overlay that Shane's done really is just going to make it a wonderful play experience for everybody. So really excited about that. So again, for everybody, here it is, Fall for Tobruk, Rommel's greatest victory. Not far off now. We're getting to the final phases where we're going to get ready to start doing the rules layout pretty soon. So we're hitting that final phase. Counters already at the printer.
Right in front of me here, in fact.
Printed out the map. So you got printed out the map and counters already. So I want to thank everybody. I hope this was helpful to everybody. I think it's really good at a certain time for a project to bring in the designer, and then in this case tonight, something new, bringing in the graphic designer to let you see sort of what's gone into a project, so you can see how decisions are being made, giving you a chance to make comments, ask questions, whether it's order of battle, complexity, focus of the game. I hope you all feel like you had a chance to do that tonight. Of course, we'll have vassal support for the game once it's released. We'll definitely have that as well. And then we have not only Gazala to look forward to, but then also Crusader battles. So with that, Chris, I think we've done our session wrap. I think we're all set. So I want to thank you for all you've done. I'll be catching you on the other side to finish up this project so we can get started on the next one. And I want to wish you a great night. I want to wish everybody that's been with us tonight. I want to wish you all a very good evening, a wonderful weekend, and we'll be back next Thursday night with Bill Thomas for Compass Games Town Hall number 7. So good night, everybody. Thank you, Chris, for joining us again.
John,
Thank you so much.
appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.